Final Fantasy XIV. I'm pretty sure you all have been hearing about this game a lot recently, with popular WoW streamer Asmongold bringing a lot of attention to it. With the influx of traffic the game has been getting lately, it's really made me think back to my first time playing it and all the incredible experiences I had with my first dungeon or my first raid. Final Fantasy XIV has such a huge part of my life. I've met friends, and I still try to convince my new friends to play the game with me, because it's really that great. It was really made popular with the release of 2.0, also known as A Realm Reborn. But it also has 3 story expansions which are fantastic, and it's paired with amazing gameplay that keeps you hooked. But we're not going to talk about that today. Today, we're going to talk about its dark past, how the game has failed, and how it's become one of the biggest MMORPGs with a massive player base. So, with that being said, I give you a brief history of Final Fantasy XIV. Flashback 16 years. Following the success of Square's first MMORPG, Final Fantasy XI, they decided that they liked money and they wanted to make a follow-up. And so, the planning for Final Fantasy XIV began sometime in 2005 and was given the codename Rapture. The company decided that 14 would be a mainline game, as opposed to being a spin-off to the series. Though the team's minds were swamped with worries that the game would be too radical compared to the other mainline games. The main team for Final Fantasy XIV included Hiromichi Tamaka, Nobuaki Komoto, Yako Soto, and Akihiko Yoshida. Now, there's a bit of a pattern here, being that basically the whole team for 14 worked on Final Fantasy XI. The story was mostly written by Yako Sato, but due to the settings and gameplay already being determined, Sato had to consult the whole team when she wanted to use Eorzea's locations in a different way, which made it extremely difficult for her to get any work done, which hindered the creative process. The story's main purpose was to be focused on the conflict between the 5 races of Eorzea and the Beastmen, with the Garlean Empire thrown in there, acting as a third conflict, being the scary bad guy. Now, shocker, this being a Final Fantasy game, the world for it was created with a high fantasy aesthetic in mind, while attempting to stay realistic and focusing on the exploration of Eorzea. They focused heavily on a seamless travel experience for players, and put a lot of effort into the topography and lighting of the land to make the environment seem less repetitive. Well, they say that, but then this came along. This is one of the most criticized parts of 1.0. The map of the Black Shroud is a twisted maze of reused assets that was absolute hell to navigate. I mean, just look how many times this specific path was reused. Nothing like reused assets to make the world feel more realistic. The game officially went live September 30th, 2010, and was met with less than favorable reviews. The game was criticized heavily by players due to its horrible performance and UI. Metacritic says the game had a beautiful world, but that's just about all it had going for it. Original players from 1.0 state that the interface lag was absolutely terrible, making switching gear or moving items in your inventory a near 15-minute process, rather than the 30-second process it should be. It was also criticized for its horrible leveling grind. Leveling in 1.0 was centered around the leave quests, which basically consisted of go here, kill this thing, come back, which would have been fine if the combat was actually good or fun. Due to the horrendous interface lag that I touched on earlier, it was near impossible to pull off any moves, making the already repetitive leave quests infinitely worse. Now, the original team who developed the game had an unhealthy obsession with graphical quality over actual gameplay content, which led to many important parts of the game, i.e. gameplay, being neglected. An example of the team's obsession with graphics lies in this simple flower pot. Pretty, right? Well, this flower pot has the same amount of polygons and shaders as a player model, which is unnecessary to say the least. Now, don't get me wrong, the game was pretty. If you squinted and ignored the fact that your character is the only thing in the world that has a shadow. I mean, they even did the infamous, ooh, let's just add this blue tint and make it seem like it's actually nighttime. A for effort? Due to the insanely negative reactions towards the game, the team decided to expand the free trial of the game, which really came off as a, are you really sure you want to play this garbage fire? It was announced shortly after release that Tanaka and Komodo were removed from their positions, with the original producer and director gone. Square needed a new team, but more importantly, Square needed a man named Naoki Yoshida, also known as Yoshi P. With Naoki Yoshida as the new producer and director of the game, they started rolling out patches in an attempt to make the game good. Eventually, Yoshi P came to the decision that the whole game was just simply a disaster, and it needed to be thrown away. So he decided to end the world. Yoshi P worked his hardest in an attempt to make the game playable and fun to the audience that has supported him. He created a workflow where the server technology, the graphics engine, and the content of the game would all be worked on at the same time, which streamlined the entire process. An important part to Yoshi P's success when working on fixing the game was, surprise surprise, actually listening to the feedback from the players. He would obsess over forums and discuss the fan feedback with his team. He would also stream the development of the game to connect fans to the process and give some much needed motivation to the dev team. All this work ultimately led to the beginning of the end. September 12th, 2012 brought upon the end of the world. Well, the end of Final Fantasy XIV's world, at least. The moon Dalamud was ready to crash into Eorzea. While the Garlean Empire was invading, the cities had started to become overrun by monsters. The final battle took place on the Cartano Flats, and it was over. That was it. That was the end of Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. Years of failure amounted up to the world getting destroyed. But this catastrophic event led into a realm reborn.